Welcome, Patty, Hector, and Adam Webb. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us. Patty and I, we've been colleagues, conspirators, I don't know what all you want to call it, for a long time. She lives in the next county over from me, but I figured we'd do some intros at first. My name's Adam Webb. I'm the executive director of the Garland County Library. That's in Hot Springs, Arkansas. I'm the president of Advocates for All Arkansas Libraries, which is a lobbying and advocacy group working on behalf of all sorts of libraries in Arkansas. I'm the chair of the Intellectual Freedom Committee for the Arkansas Library Association. I'm on a few PLA committees. I love eating tacos. It's my favorite thing. I had tacos for lunch today and then tried to con my family into having tacos for dinner. And as a disclaimer, I am not a lawyer. And then Patty, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm the former director of Saline County Library, the recipient of the 2024 Lemony Snicket Prize for Noble Librarians Faced with Adversity, a candidate for the Saline County Quorum Court, also not a lawyer.
And I'll also mention Patty was announced the recipient of the Intellectual Freedom Award for Arkansas for this year as well for her work. So congratulations, Patty.
Thank you.
I figured there's probably a lot of librarians in the room, so I won't go over all of the notes I have about constitutionality and libraries. You probably know this in and out, but just for some context for the laws that were passed in Arkansas, libraries are a government function by and large. And so we have to follow constitutional rights that our patrons have, Supreme Court precedents that have applied to libraries, and state and local laws. And a lot of people don't understand this, at least on the legislative side, but there is a constitutional right to receive information. There have been half a dozen Supreme Court cases that have affirmed this right as the corollary to the freedom of speech. Lovell versus Griffith, Miller versus Struthers, Griswold versus Connecticut, et cetera, et cetera. One of my favorites was Lamont versus Postmaster General, which talked about how the dissemination of ideas can accomplish nothing if otherwise willing addressees are not free to receive and consider them. It would be a barren marketplace of ideas that only had sellers and no buyers. Those rights have extended to public libraries through other cases like Kramer versus the Board of Police, that found that these rights extend to libraries in our unique position as the place where people typically receive information. So that means that libraries have a special responsibility with respect to access and services to people who wish to utilize library services. I love this quote. I've got it on my screensaver at work. It is from a case called West Virginia State Board of Education versus Barnett. It was about compelled speech regarding whether or not children had to put their hand over their heart or pledge allegiance to the flag. This was from 1943. And the Supreme Court Chief Justice at the time said that if there's any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it's that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. And it's important to keep that quote in mind because it's been covered over and over and over again in cases regarding library materials. Generally speaking, public libraries can only make reasonable restrictions on constitutionally protected activities given our status as a limited public forum. Like a traditional public forum, viewpoint or content-based speech restrictions in a designated public forum are subject to strict scrutiny. So our ability to just say we don't like this speech, so we're going to get rid of it is really not a constitutional issue that we should be trying to push against. One question I get asked a lot from people in Arkansas anyway, in regards to this is, well, these are just children and they don't have rights under the Constitution. But in two separate federal court cases, courts have decided that kids have First Amendment rights the same as adults. Tinker versus Des Moines Independent School District ruled that children do not leave their First Amendment rights at the doorstep of the school, and that was reaffirmed in Pico That's a pretty famous case. I'm sure a lot of y'all know that one. Justice Brennan in that case said, in brief, we hold that local school boards may not remove books from school library shelves simply because they dislike the ideas contained in those books and seek by their removal to prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. And there were a couple of cases here in Arkansas, one which we're going through right now, that have reaffirmed these things. One was Counts versus Cedarville, which was a case where a school district tried to remove Harry Potter from the shelves and make parents sign permission slips. And a very conservative district court judge, Judge Hendren, ruled that that was an unconstitutional burden on protected speech because the Harry Potter books are not criminal speech in any way, shape, or form. So the big question that always gets asked in Arkansas in this regard is about obscene materials. And I like to ask librarians a lot whenever I'm doing in-service training, whether they think their library has obscene materials. And by and large, at this point, everybody knows that the answer is no, that libraries do not have obscene materials. And then for the folks who don't, the follow-up question is always, well, how do we know if something is obscene? And the problem is libraries are facing strong headwinds because of the personal definition of obscene versus the federal definition of obscene, which is covered under the Miller test. And a lot of y'all probably know this one too. This is the culmination of a lot of case law going back 100 years in our country, trying to determine whether expressive works or artistic works are covered under the First Amendment. This is a fairly strong standard. You have to fail all three. It's a trier of fact. So for something to be considered obscene under the Miller test, it not only has to appeal to the prurient interest when taken as a whole, it has to be patently offensive, and it has to lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. So it's got to fail all three. And by and large, if you can buy a book from a commercial bookseller or at Barnes & Noble or at a local bookstore, it's not obscene. And therefore, it's protected speech. Now, you have what they call variable obscenity laws, which vary from state to state. Most of them are typically called harmful to minors laws. But by and large, the harmful to minors laws mirror the Miller test, but they only add in the language as pertains to a minor. In Arkansas, I think when they were doing the impact on our censorship law, which I'll come and talk about here in just a minute, the Arkansas Board of Corrections said that there were 3 prosecuted cases of obscenity in the last 10 years in Arkansas, and all 3 of them were over material that the purchaser and seller knew were judicially determined to be obscene. So it wasn't anything in a library, it wasn't anything in a bookstore, and it certainly wasn't anything that would be on a school shelf. So with that background, we'll kind of go into what's been going on in Arkansas. We haven't gotten a lot of press here, but we have been a fairly hot place for censorship, notably in 4 communities, and we'll kind of go over these in turn. The first one was Craighead County, which is in the northeast part of the state. This all began back in 2021. So we've been dealing with this for about 3 years and some change. The administrators of the Craighead County Library put up a pride display, which they had done for years before. Craighead County Library is in a town called Jonesboro. It's a big college town. It's got the 2nd largest university in the state. And they've been doing pride displays for years and years. And for some reason this year, in 2021, everything came to a head. And it was spearheaded by this man, Dan Sullivan. He is a state senator. He's in his 2nd term, or he's running for his 2nd term, I believe. He was in the House for a while. This is him. He's a retired educator. He's got a pretty checkered past in his time as not only an administrator, but as a teacher. He was responsible for the death of 2 children in his care in 2 separate incidents. When he was At the state, when he was in the state house, rather, he was advocating for fewer regulations in the childcare industry. And because of a lack of following existing regulations, a child at his pre-K that he was the administrator for died in a hot car death. During that same time period, he appeared before the Arkansas Early Childhood Commission and was pushing them to reduce their requirement that 50% of childcare employees be certified in CPR and first aid, all as a cost-saving measure. And when they refused, a number of commissioners heard him leaving, vowing that he would address the needs for the commission during the next legislative session. And then the only bill that he sponsored in that session was one to strip that commission of its authority to regulate child care centers. So you've got kind of a bad actor behind all this. Not only that, but when the library didn't bow to their every whim, Senator Sullivan went after their funding. This was a story that came out about a year later when he and 500 citizens in Jonesboro signed a petition to decrease the funding for the Jonesboro Public Library. During this period, they had run off 2 directors, and they were working on their third, who's still there. God bless her. She's down in the trenches, but she's working on it. Not only did Senator Sullivan sign the petition, he was actually a canvasser and went around and gathered signatures for this defunding measure. Now, he said in the press over and over again that it was because the library was overfunded. And I'm sure even libraries in California can agree that there's no such thing as an overfunded library. They had a little money in reserve, and he used that against them. And ultimately, he was successful. The millage campaign passed to cut their funding in half. The library had to fire 13 employees. They had to cut weekend hours. None of the branches are open on weekends anymore, and the main isn't open on Sundays. What's galling about this is in Arkansas, you only need 100 signatures from taxpaying electors to get a petition on the ballot to increase, decrease, or abolish the library's funding. However, the legislature increased these limits for other types of ballot initiatives that were passing popular acts in the state, including medical marijuana. We had a really strong petition to enshrine abortion access in our Constitution, only to have it thrown out on procedural grounds. And what really upset me about this was that Senator Sullivan himself failed on a number of procedural grounds getting this petition on the ballot, but he found willful conspirators to help shepherd it through and get it on the ballot. So in the city of Jonesboro, which is the majority of their funding, they lost by 40 votes and had their funding cut in half. So after that was Crawford County. And I know Patty talked with a lot of the folks at Crawford County. You want to talk about this one a little bit?
Don't you have a slide?
Yeah.
So the librarian was very new. It was her first job. She was the director. It's a fairly small system. And she tried to work with the book banners when they came to her. And she actually moved some books to a section that they called the social section. And the quorum court is the board of supervisors in California. So it's the county government. Put some people on her library board that were very conservative, and they ran off 3 other library board members and took control. And even though she had tried to work with them, they basically made her resign, which is really frustrating. And they've had a lot of issues. They got in trouble for her moving those books and have been sued. And their whole county has issues because their county judge, who is their county CEO, has wasted money and lost money and now they're being sued and they owe all this money for lawyers. But there's a lot of good people there who are running for their quorum court and trying to get on the library board to get it back. They tried for a year and some months to even get anybody to be the library director after they ran her off.
That unfortunately brings me to Patty's old library, which I'll let her go through the history of what happened here.
Yeah, so the Republican Party in Saline County is all of the JPs, the Justice of the Peace, which are the Board of Supervisors for you Californians. They're all Republican, and during the pandemic, the party got taken over by MAGA extremists, and they took the list of bad books from Moms for Liberty, and they got library cards and came in the library, and they took the books and they just went to the quorum court meetings and didn't even come to the library staff. So it was a coordinated effort, based on what's going on nationally. And they got the quorum court members all riled up, and who in the past had been library supporters, but they also were trying to get them to switch to paper ballots. And in an effort to get rid of that issue, they threw the library under the bus, and they went way overboard. That was about the same time that Dan Sullivan was doing a law to make it a felony for a librarian that checks out an obscene book, and anybody can call it obscene. So the quorum court made a resolution telling me to remove these obscene books, and they didn't allow me to speak to it. They only 2 of them even came. There's 13 of them, and only 2 of them came in and talked to me. And so I opened my big mouth to anyone who would listen. TV, all the TV stations, all the newspapers, and I infuriated the quorum court members and the county judge. And the Saline County Republican women, they got a billboard that said X-rated books. Ooh, there it is. SalineLibrary.com. And then they went after me and put a billboard up that trying to get me fired. And the quorum court wouldn't stand up to them. But the library board did, and they said they wouldn't fire me. So the quorum court rewrote the library ordinance so that the county judge is in charge of employees, and so he fired me. And I think, and we did have a library alliance that was wonderful. It was we had hundreds of people attending those quorum court meetings, and everybody that was for the library was treated really badly. I mean, the staff were called horrible, horrible names, and they did things on social media that were just awful. They're just mean people. You want to show them the picture of John Newcomb? So there's a couple of Republicans that have that guy, the one in the overalls. Their party is eating itself right now, and at the last meeting, that guy got punched out last week. So if you want to see something really entertaining, go to Saline County Republicans Fight. What did I leave out, Adam?
No, that was about it. It got really nasty in Saline County. From an outsider's perspective, you started to hear reasonable folks in communities surrounding Saline County saying, we can't let this seep over here. So it was almost like the fever that finally broke the sickness. And you get to my county, which has had some relative calm. We saw things happen the same way they did with Patty. It started out with some people coming in to challenge specific books. It's always the same books. It's books with LGBTQ characters, books that deal with race, you name it. I mean, you can probably name the titles. You're probably naming them off right now to each other in the room. But we went through the process of reconsideration. The patrons did not appeal the decision of the committees to keep the books where they were, and we thought all was well. There were 3 candidates for local office who ran on the same anti-library platform that a lot of the folks in Saline County were running, and all 3 lost their primary challenges. Then all of a sudden, I got a call from a reporter saying, "Have you heard about this petition to cut your funding?" And this was a petition to abolish our library tax in Garland County. We would not have gotten a single cent had this passed. So we took some cues from Saline County and others, and I'll go over those on the what you can do slide. But by and large, know who your supporters are. Identify them now. Make sure you got an Excel spreadsheet, and you can turn people out at a moment's notice if you need to. I'll talk a bit about outside of those 4 counties, what's been going on statewide. And the big one is Act 372, which was passed last year in the Arkansas legislative session, the 93rd session, I think, or something like that. An act to amend the law concerning libraries and obscene materials made available to minors and for other purposes. I bet you can guess who the person who shepherded that through is Senator Dan Sullivan, who in this hot mic moment when he was talking to the National Association of Christian Lawmakers, changed his tune about why they cut the funding in Craighead County, where he said, quote, "Libraries are an institution, often like higher ed, that are far left, and they've been a bastion of the left wing. They're the ones holding the drag queen shows. They're the ones promoting Pride Month. Our county library last year had huge pride signs and flags and books. This year, they backed off that and had very little because we took their money away. You learn as a legislator really quick. If you want things to change, take the money. I love libraries. They're fantastic institutions. They've been taken over by the far left, and it's time for us to take them back. When we come back in session in 2 years, we're going to eliminate all funding for public libraries that have the American Library Association in their policy. We're going to take a shot at them because that's where this is coming from." Not only did Senator Sullivan pass Act 372, which criminalizes certain aspects of librarianship and takes the decisions away from librarians and their appointed boards and gives them to the hand of elected officials, he also got this piece of work appointed to the Arkansas State Library Board. This is former State Senator Jason Rapert, who's infamous in library circles for saying that librarians should be drowned in the Arkansas River, that Jesus would have burned books, that his colleagues on the State Library Board should be taken out and tarred and feathered because they won't go along with his book banning scheme or his ransom scheme to withhold state funding for libraries that have certain books on the shelf. He's also infamous for when he was a state senator saying things like, "We're not going to allow minorities to run roughshod over what you people believe in." And he got reelected. Also, I think it's interesting to point out that he's a really good friend, former reality TV star and noted sex offender and current federal prison inmate Josh Duggar. And he's never apologized for his friendship with Josh. But at some point, libraries finally got ourselves organized. You know how much we love to organize, but it's not always the quickest thing. And we started fighting back. The very first thing we did was we sued over Act 372. This is a picture of me looking not so flattering, and Nate Coulter, the director of the Central Arkansas Library System, who always looks put together.
He's a lawyer.
He is a lawyer, former politician himself. But we sued to overturn sections of Act 372, and we've been successful so far. The 2 parts of the new law on library materials, on the availability provision and the challenge provision, have both been enjoined in federal court, and they have been held up in court, and there will be a trial at the end of this year. Not only that, but a lot of reporting came out of Crawford County, if you remember them from earlier in the petition, saying that their library censorship schemes so far have cost them $420,000 in attorney fees. It's really not looking great for the elected officials there who bolstered these claims and tried to push it as a political issue because now they're seeing the receipts for what it costs for them to move books like Worm Loves Worm out of the children's department and put it in a stigmatized section in the adult department. Not only that, but Erica Askland, who's a local educator, is running against Dan Sullivan, and she's got a pretty good chance of beating him. I put a QR code there to her her candidacy site if you want to read more about her. She's a great person. She's been debating him and mopping the floor with him, and now he's getting really drastic and desperate and saying things like she didn't put paid for by on her campaign signs, even though it says the committee to elect Erica. And then old Patty's running for Saline County Quorum Court. The very same body that fired her is now looking down the barrel of having to work with her. So if you want to go to her campaign site, I put the QR code there for her as well. And then the folks who were trying to get rid of my funding, they got their ballot initiative thrown out by our county judge on the same procedural grounds that Dan Sullivan was able to sneak through up in Jonesboro. We hired a good attorney, and we asked the county judge to have a hearing on the petition, and he did. And it was standing room only with library supporters. 4 people from the anti-tax organization got up and left before it even started, saying, quote, "There are too many demons in this room." And we won. And as of tomorrow at 5 p.m., if they don't file another petition, I won't have to worry about defunding for another 2 years. So we've had some success, even in the face of about 3 years of adversity. So that brings us around to just a chat from Patty and I about what you can do. What's your best course of medicine? And then we'll open the floor for questions and answers from Lauren and y'all. But on the what you can do side, even if you don't have censorship battles at your library or in your community, and you're a practicing librarian, you need to first of all make good friends with your local reporters. Independent journalists, they are in the same boat as libraries when it comes to First Amendment protections. And by and large, they are very supportive and understanding and sympathetic towards libraries. So if you don't know your local print journalists or TV reporters, reach out to them. After that, make sure that you're telling your story. You know, if you're not in the press or talking in front of civic groups about all the good stuff that your library does, you're not telling your story. And it makes it a lot easier for somebody else to tell your story if you're not doing it. The third thing I tell people is identify your supporters now. And that's not just library patrons. If you have a contract with a company that cuts your grass, they're going to be affected if your funding's cut. So make sure that the CEO or the business owners that you work with as a library know the value of the library being funded. It's not quid pro quo to go out and say to your business partners, like, hey, we really appreciate the work you do for us, but we're having some difficulties and we're hoping maybe that you might sign a letter or put your name onto a letter that we're going to publish in the paper saying that we support the library. Patty, you got any thoughts on those things?
Yeah, I think one thing to keep in mind is that these weren't normal challenges that we've had for years. These people weren't complaining about a book that their child read. It was a coordinated attack, had really nothing to do with the books. It was about control and taking control of the quorum court. So it's very different because I never thought it was going to get us in Saline County. We had great community support. We hadn't had a book challenge in 10 years. But they're not good faith efforts. They don't want to talk to you. They didn't even come to us. So don't treat it like a typical challenge over a book that a parent doesn't like. That's not what it is.
Yeah. In addition to that, it's always the same books, as I said. And y'all know that. You get the lists from ALA showing the top 13 banned books. So make sure you're aware of them. Unite Against Book Bans did a really great job of creating book resumes to show if someone comes in, for example, and they're complaining about All Boys Aren't Blue, you can turn to a nicely produced sheet that says, well, here are all the professional reviews saying how good a book this is. Here are the age ranges that various professionals say this book is good for. Here are all the awards that it's won. And so you have some defense, even though I don't really think you necessarily need it memorized, but just to know that it's there. If you do get somebody coming in who said, I saw something on social media about this book, and it was really concerning to me. And being able to have those conversations in a calm way is really the best way to handle them. But you might get people who come in and want to start yelling about books. And in that case, you know that you're dealing with one of those bad faith efforts that's really more of meme culture than it is a concerned parent. It's someone who saw something on social media and was told to be upset about it, and so now they're upset about it. I've heard the phrase angertainment in regards to book bans, and that seems to be a fairly appropriate statement.
Yeah.
The other things you can do is reach out to a number of national organizations that work in this space. I'm thinking every library.
They are wonderful.
They are wonderful people, and they'll get down in the trenches with you. ALA Office of Intellectual Freedom, they're fairly overwhelmed at this point. They're stretched pretty thin. Same with the ACLU, although ACLU of Arkansas is a much smaller organization than I'm sure it is in California. But ACLU is willing to pitch in. They're one of the legal counsel in our case against Act 372, along with another organization called Democracy Forward, which I would say is a great group to reach out to. They're leading the way in Alabama right now. If you've been following any of the story of the Prattville Library in Alabama, they are the lead counsel there for the Library Alliance, trying to get some of this stuff overturned. And then FIRE, which is a smaller organization, libertarian-leaning group, but it's the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression. I think I got their acronym right. And they have also been involved in some library lawsuits when it comes to that. Now, a lot of Arkansas librarians are envious of California. We know that Governor Newsom is probably not ever going to sign a bill like that. In fact, I think you're one of the few states that has a anti-book ban law in place or is currently working its way through the state capitol. But just make sure that you have as much preventative care as you can before this happens, because it has spread a bit like a disease. And I'm not trying to use inflammatory rhetoric there, but it spreads from one community to another. It doesn't just pop up randomly here and there. It's moving like a wave, and it seems like it all started in Florida and has just kind of moved its way out of the Southeast and made its way to other conservative circles. So that's kind of all we have to say about what's going on in Arkansas. We'd be happy to answer questions or just chat about it.